welcome to Deadline. Lately, you've probably heard a lot about the refugee crisis, but millions of people from the Middle East are on the run from the crisis in their own countries. A lot of them have been settling in Europe, and unfortunately, the European countries don't know how to respond to all the refugees. Today on Deadline, we're going to talk to the head of Unicef in Iceland about the refugee crisis and what Iceland is doing to help.
Thank you for your time. To begin with, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your work here at Unicef in Iceland?
Yeah, thank you. My name is Bergsteinn. I'm the Executive Director of Unicef Iceland. I work here with the Icelandic National Committee, raising funds mostly, but also, for UNICEF's projects around the world, but also raising people's awareness of UNICEF's work and the status of the children in the world. And lastly, we also do advocacy for children's rights in Iceland.
What is the role, you kind of answered that, what is the role of UNICEF? And what kind of work do you do within the organization? How do you take those goals and make them happen, like you just said?
Well, what we do here is, like I said, mostly fundraising.
Yeah.
So we garner support from the public, from companies, and from foundations by presenting to them UNICEF's cause, which is, the rights of every child in the world. And we take those funds and we send them to UNICEF, who works in 190 countries in the world, and the funds go towards implementing different kinds of programs. It can be education, child protection, nutrition, water and sanitation, things like that. So most of the money we raise is from the public, and that is actually unearmarked. So we just take the pool of money that we gather, mostly from pledged donors who support us every month, and we send that money to the headquarters of UNICEF, and UNICEF distributes the money to their country offices all around the world to help with those kind of programs. So the donation might go towards education in Burkina Faso, or it may go to water and sanitation in Niger, just everywhere where the need is most. And this is a very flexible pool of funding, which UNICEF is very grateful for, because that means UNICEF can be working on themes which are not popular at the moment, in countries where media attention isn't at the moment, so we can be really responsive to the situation of children all around the world.
What is your contribute to the refugee problem the world is facing today?
Well, UNICEF is very much involved because we work in the countries of origin, the countries of transit, but we're also present in the countries of arrival of refugees. So, anything from trying to improve basic services in the countries where these people live, and offering emergency aid if they're dealing with conflict or crisis due to climate change, things like that. We're also trying to put pressure on governments generally in the world to improve the situation of people on the move, of children on the move, because there are around 50 million children in the world today which are, not in their home, which are moving about, and around 25 million of those are on the move because of conflict. So we work in conflict situations, we deliver emergency aid, but we're also trying to put pressure on politicians and statesmen to try and get the international community together to do something about this refugee situation, because it's there because of really big problems. It exists because of social inequality and economic inequality and conflict and crisis because of climate change. So the world really needs to come together and try and solve those big issues in a meaningful way. So that's why it's also very important to put this high-level political pressure as well.
Yeah. But how are the refugee facilities in Iceland?
Well, it varies. When you first come to the country as an asylum seeker, you are processed by the Directorate of Immigration, and those facilities are not very good. And we've made comments about that. And
Why not?
well, essentially they're not child-friendly. So they're very basic, and they're not a good place for children to be in for a long time. Fortunately, they're not there for a very long time. They're there while their cases are being processed. And from them they go to the municipalities. And there the situation is different. There people get different accommodations and okay accommodations. And that's for asylum seekers. Then there's different case for quota refugees who get more assistance. And those are the refugees that the government, in cooperation with UNHCR, which is the refugee organization of the UN, they negotiate with them. They get a certain number of people who maybe be living in some refugee camp somewhere and are registered refugees. And when we bring those people into the country, they are fewer, we essentially give them a lot more services to help them, at least for the first year.
Yeah. Well, what is the quota Iceland is?
It's not so high. I think around 50 people per year. I think the latest figure that they're projecting for next year is around 50 people. And then around 1,400 people were asylum seekers last year.
Yeah, so it's very small.
I suppose it's quite small. I mean, Iceland is a small country, and I suppose we could do a lot better in receiving more quota refugees. But I think because the increase has been so much in the asylum seekers, that people are hesitant to take more quota refugees as of now. But of those 1,400 asylum seekers, relatively few get asylum in Iceland.
Yeah. And I don't know if you have much information about this, but how is this compared to other countries? Is it on par with our neighboring countries, or is it very different?
I think Iceland and Finland are probably similar in that we receive fewer people than the rest of the Nordics.
Yeah.
So Sweden, I don't know the situation in Denmark right now. Sweden, Norway, they receive a lot more.
Yeah.
Relatively.
Yeah. Okay. From which country or countries do the majority of refugees in Iceland come from? Is there anyone in particular that is?
I think with the quota refugees, it's mostly Syrians we've been bringing on board for the past few years.
Yeah.
But regarding the asylum seekers, vast majority of them, they come from Eastern Europe, Southeastern Europe, like Albania and Macedonia, places like that. Yeah. Places that the UN Refugee Agency considers as safe.
Yeah.
So that's why very, very few of them get asylum. But I think most of the asylum seekers that we have given asylum, I think those are Syrians and Afghanis, I think mostly. Increase has been so much in the asylum seekers that people are hesitant to take more quota refugees as of now. But of those 1,400 asylum seekers, relatively few get asylum in Iceland.
Yeah. And I don't know if you have much information about this, but how is this compared to other countries? Is it on par with our neighboring countries, or is it
It's
very different?
I think Iceland and Finland are probably similar in that we receive fewer people than the rest of the Nordics.
Yeah.
So Sweden, I don't know the situation in Denmark right now. Sweden, Norway, they receive a lot more.
Yeah.
You know, relatively.
Yeah. Okay. From which country or countries do the majority of refugees in Iceland come from? Is there anyone in particular that is?
I think with the quota refugees, it's mostly Syrians we've been bringing on board for the past few years.
Yeah.
But regarding the asylum seekers, vast majority of them, they come from actually come from Eastern Europe, Southeastern Europe, like Albania and Macedonia, places like that.
Yeah.
Places that the UN Refugee Agency considers as safe.
Yeah.
So that's why very, very few of them get asylum. But I think most of the asylum seekers that we have given asylum, I think those are Syrians and Afghanis, I think mostly.
Yeah. Okay. But what about immigrants? Are they getting a similar treatment?
Well, no, I mean, if you're an immigrant, you're basically, most of the time you're coming here for work. And you already have a work permit and a residence connected to that work permit.
Yeah.
And then probably your company supplies you with housing, or you try to find yourself. So those people are, you know, they're in a different situation because they're not running from, you know, insecurity or danger.
Yeah. But do you think Icelanders have a different, how do I say this? Do they treat immigrants differently than refugees or asylum seekers? Do you think so? The public is more prejudiced towards?
I mean, I suppose, I mean, I don't think there's a large group of people who is very prejudiced against refugees and immigrants. Sometimes, you know, if you have general phobia against foreigners, you're pretty much against everybody. But then there's probably another layer of people that accepts immigrants because they're coming here to work and to assimilate, but have some kind of a distrust of refugees. So that's a possibility.
Yeah.
Although, I mean, I don't think there's a lot of opposition to either immigration or refugees in Iceland compared to most other countries.
Yeah.
You know, for now, we're lucky in that respect.
Is there anything that Iceland could do better as a nation on this matter?
Yeah, for sure. We could improve our facilities. We could improve our whole asylum system. The thing is that it has increased. The asylum seekers have increased so much in the past few years that there are a lot of growing pains in our asylum system. So we need to organize better, and we need to improve the asylum system, and we need to take in more quota refugees. I think we could take in more than 50 people a year.
Yeah. But how can the public contribute to the matter?
Well, I mean, the public needs to, you know, be aware of the issues and demand action from politicians, you know, to make sure that we keep our house in order, have a good system, and do more. So basically raise their voices, be educated and raise their voices.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.